This is Pastor Jeff Chavis. I'm coming to you from Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm the pastor of an online group called Church Online, and we spell that uniquely CHRCH. You can find us online at churchonline.com. Well, yesterday at about 3:30 in the afternoon, Central Time, I was right over the broadcast area. I was flying back from a conference and they routed me through to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and I saw on the little flight tracker on the back of my seat, it said Valparaiso, Indiana. So I was over the broadcast area just about 3:30 in the afternoon yesterday. I was reflecting as I was sitting there, what I was going to say this morning, and I obviously wanted to take something I got out of this conference. And one of the main speakers was a guy named Kent Chevalier, who happens to be the chaplain of the Pittsburgh Steelers, which is an amazing position to be in. But then he pointed out that he goes through a lot of the same challenges that many of us do in our Christian walk of faith, only his mission field is this group of athletes who are at the highest level of professional football. But one of the things that he pointed out, and this really stuck out to me, is about us being a representative of Jesus. Our job is to represent Jesus. Now, he pointed out that's what his job is every day he walks into training camp, the locker room, onto a field. He's there to be Christ's ambassador, to represent Jesus. But he said that's absolutely all of us. Every single one of us has that same duty. Of course, the verse we use, 2 Corinthians 5:20 and 21. Now then, we are ambassadors for Christ, as though God were pleading through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf to be reconciled to God. For he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. That's 2 Corinthians 5:20 and 21. And he said, the one challenge in our world today, of course, is to be that, the representative for God on this earth, the representative for Christ on this earth. And the phrase that God is pleading, like on our knees, just pleading for people to know more about him, to learn more about him, and yes, to come into that relationship with him. But he pointed out that the biggest challenge in our culture and in our day and age is that people really don't have a sense of who the real Jesus is. Oh, a lot of people in our culture know Jesus to some extent. Maybe the Christmas and the Easter story. They know the story, but they don't know the real Jesus. And he said, really, the role of a Christian today needs not just to represent Christ, but he said, and he put this on the screen, to re-present Jesus. So if you think of the word represent, put a hyphen between the re and the present. We need to present the real Jesus again and again. That's our goal as a representative, is to present him over and over, because we're in this day and age and in this culture where there's so many other Jesuses out there. Now, yes, there is one Jesus, but this culture has this idea that there's a different kind of Jesus. Like, we are all well aware of some of those different kinds of Jesus, like, oh, he's the good teacher, the great prophet, but he wasn't God in human form. He was, oh, I don't know, this angry man upstairs who is ready to smack us down when we step out of line. Or the flip side of that is I could care less, the Jesus that just ignores it all. But what our culture needs as much as anything is for Jesus to be the real Jesus, the Jesus that we find on the pages of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's the Jesus we represent. Now, of course, as a follower of Jesus, that means first and foremost, to represent him, we have to know him. And we have to know the real him for ourselves. So for many of us, maybe that's where we go back to square one. When was the last time you read through the Gospels? Like all the way through, front to back. Each one of them. Taking them maybe in order if you feel like chronologically or however. but work our way through the scripture and just write down or even just star or circle the verses or whatever, those places in scripture where we see who Jesus really is. And then we would be more equipped to share the real Jesus. And the truth is, he says this may be controversial, but the reality is you don't have to make it controversial if you just say, this is what it says in the Bible. Of course, there will be people that will argue, but the idea is if we're representing Jesus, presenting him again, we're just doing it straight from Scripture. This is what it says. This is not who Jesus is. This is who Jesus is. Think of the words that Jesus said in his culture. He used the example in Matthew chapter 5 in the Sermon on the Mount. In Jesus's day and age, he had to represent Scripture to a culture that knew scripture so well. Most little children were memorizing scripture. Most adults had a lot of it committed to memory. They would gather together on a regular basis and work their way through the scriptures. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, they might have had much of the Old Testament committed to memory, if you could believe that. So their culture was soaked in scripture, but yet they had some things that Jesus said, you're just not getting it. And he used this 5 times in the Sermon on the Mount. He said, you have heard it said, but I say, for example, in Matthew 5, he says, you have heard it said that there are those who are of old, but you shall not murder. But whoever murders will be in danger of judgment. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of judgment. That's in Matthew 5:21. So it's the you have heard it said, like their whole lives, you've heard it said, you shall not murder. And then he tacks on the whoever murders will be in danger of judgment. But I say, so Jesus takes it a little deeper and says, okay, this is what you have heard. And yes, that's in the law, but this is how it works out in our personal lives, that it's in our heart. So he had to also represent the scripture to a culture that just knew the scripture so well. In the same way, so many people that we know, they're seeing a Jesus that's not the real Jesus. How can we do that in a way that's respectful, in a way that's loving, but in a way that's going to get people's attention? That's our job as an ambassador for Christ. So I want to encourage you. If you could think of somebody right now, we're about to go into our time of prayer, and I'm going to ask you to think about a person right now that maybe that doesn't have a good picture of who Jesus is. Maybe they say things like, well, God and I have an understanding, or that's not the Jesus I know. They make statements like that because they don't really know.